Human Rights Watch claims credible evidence shows the Saudi-led coalition has used U.S.-supplied cluster bombs in airstrikes in Yemen. Meanwhile, military officials there say coalition special forces have arrived in Aden. With the death toll already over 7,000 people, a Nepali minister says that number is expected to climb much higher as rescue teams struggle to reach remote villages. And protests in the Israeli-Ethiopian community continue. Hundreds demonstrate in Tel Aviv against discrimination and police brutality.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the News Today. A report from Human Rights Watch today is adding new dimension to the fight of the Saudi-backed coalition in Yemen. The rights organization claims evidence shows that the coalition used cluster munition supplied by the United States, no less, in airstrikes against Houthi forces. Those arms are banned by a 2008 treaty and one not adopted by Saudi Arabia, Yemen, or the United States. Also today, military officials in Yemen said some 40-50 special forces of the coalition troops landed in the port city of Aden, though Saudi Arabia insists that's not true and that has not started a major ground operation. We will look closer at the entire situation, but first, let's take a look back.
Saudi Arabia is a strategic partner of the United States and a regional leader, and we're going to continue to enjoy close, productive relationships with the leaders of Saudi Arabia.
إيران لا زالت تحاول أن ترسل بوارق حربية محملة بالسلاح.
خرجنا اليوم مستضعفين مثل السعاودة والمعتدين أننا لا زلنا أحياء وسنظل أحياء على رؤوسهم حتى آخر لحظة.
This operation will continue until the objectives are achieved. There will be no half measures, and there can be no half measures.
Yes, and with me to discuss this matter is Nahum Shilo, Research Fellow at Moshe Dayan Center. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
And also Barbara Opel-Rome, long time no see, Israel Bureau Chief at Defense News. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. So Barbara, let's start with you. The use of cluster bombs, it reminds me the beginning of, maybe not the beginning, but maybe the discussion that the United States held on drones just a few years ago. What is so wrong with the United States using this?
Well, from what I understand, this is the coalition, the Saudi-led coalition that is alleged to have been using these weaponry. And from what I understand, they are not
supplied by the U.S.
Yes, supplied by the U.S. Saudi is the #1 arms customer, and as opposed, unlike Israel, Saudi Arabia actually pays for the weaponry that it receives from the U.S. But I don't think that there is an international prohibition against its use if the targets are deemed of critical military value. Right now, we have to understand that they are not wielding precision force, and more than 1,000 people have died and so many displaced. But the greater objective, and something that the Saudi-led coalition has maintained a semblance of legitimacy, is basically for the fact that they do not want to allow Iran to set up another forward base in this Bab el-Mandeb strategic strait that is the entrance to the Red Sea, that would, imagine Gaza, South Lebanon, and now in the Gulf of Aden and these strategic straits to have Iranian weaponry that would shut down shipping in a much more narrow area than the Strait of Hormuz.
And let's not forget that at the end of the day, basically, Saudi Arabia is doing the job for the United States, is in one way or another doing everything that the United States cannot do. Boots on the ground, air forces, fighting the fight that the United States maybe doesn't want to fight. And my question is, why does Saudi Arabia is hiding the fact, or is saying, no, we're not going boots on the ground. No, we wanted to go, but now we're not going, just like a week ago when they declared that they want to do a ground operation. What is keeping Saudi Arabia from being clear on its attacks in Yemen?
Well, as it seems, Saudi Arabia has not decided yet whether to use ground forces. And everybody in Saudi Arabia knows history. And history tells that every country which invades Yemen is going to have troubles and bloodshed. Saudi Arabia has invaded Yemen twice in the 20th century. In 1934, when it was a disaster. The Saudis paid a high price with their soldiers. In 1962, when the civil war erupted between the royalists and the revolutionaries, the revolutionary forces, Saudi Arabia intervened, as well as Egypt. They were rivals at that time. But both sides paid heavy price with casualties and with no gains. So the Yemeni terrain, especially near the Saada area, where the stronghold of the Houthis is very difficult for ground moves, especially for armored forces. You can enter it only with light infantry, light armors or infantry, and the only pass which is, let's say, feasible for a military ground operation is the coastline of Yemen, from the Saudi-Yemeni borders, southwards to the Hodeidah and to Aden, and this is not enough to take over Yemen. Actually, nobody controls Yemen. It's
nobody control. It seems that nobody controls the Middle East in either way, in any way. But before we're continuing to discuss this and getting into all this, also Iran in the middle of all this, Eli Ochelberg has more on the Human Rights Watch claims and the Gulf countries planning to ask for new weapons.
Human Rights Watch has accused the Saudi-led coalition of allegedly using U.S.-supplied cluster bombs in its fight against Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. HRW released a report Sunday saying it has much evidence, including videos and photos, that the coalition's fighter jets dropped cluster bombs in the northern Saada province in Yemen. There is no indication whether any casualties resulted from their use. Cluster bombs are considered to be inaccurate weapons, which pose a long-term danger to civilians because they both spread sporadically over wide areas, and if they do not explode on impact, can lie inactive and then detonate when stumbled on by chance. Cluster bombs were banned by 116 countries in an international treaty back in 2008, though not by the United States, Saudi Arabia, or Yemen. In August 2013, the U.S. sold Saudi Arabia $640 million worth of American-made cluster bombs, possibly the ones used in the attack in Yemen. But Yemen is not the only item on the U.S. Gulf agenda. Leaders of the Six-Nation Gulf Cooperation Council, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, plan to use the scheduled meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama later this month to request major new weapon systems and security reassurance in exchange for their backing of the nuclear agreement with Iran. On Tuesday, the Gulf leaders will gather in Riyadh for their annual summit and are expected to discuss their demands to the U.S. They are seeking additional fighter jets, drones, missile batteries, and surveillance equipment. They also want to draft new defense agreements between Gulf nations and the U.S., outlining the terms under which Washington will intervene if Iran poses a threat.
And joining us right now to this conversation is Belkis Vile, Yemen and Kuwait researcher. Human Rights Watch is with us from Istanbul. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Belkis.
Thank you for having me.
So, Belkis, what are the evidence that you found that shows the use of cluster bombs on the ground?
Well, first, it's worth pointing out that Saudi Arabia already used cluster munitions in Yemen in a war it participated in between the Yemeni government and the Houthis in 2009. As a result of our documenting of cluster munitions at that time, we raised concerns the first day after airstrikes began in this war, calling on the Saudis to say on the record that they would not be using cluster munitions. The next day in a press conference, a spokesman said indeed they were not using cluster munitions. Several days later, however, we received video evidence of parachutes landing from an airstrike, parachutes that deliver a weapon system that looked to us like cluster munitions that we knew that an American company had sold to Saudi Arabia in 2013. Unfortunately, we could not determine from the film alone that this was indeed the cluster munitions that we thought. We could only do that with photo evidence of the remnants landing on the ground that would demonstrate to us that these were indeed the munitions we thought they were. And several days later, we received photos from local residents in northern Yemen. They sent us photos of exactly those cluster munitions that we had suspected were used. So what we then needed to determine is through satellite imagery, we were able to verify the film as true and as filmed exactly from where locals told us it was in Yemen.
So from where are coming the let's say the evidence or any knowledge that these cluster bombs were actually supplied by the United States?
So these contracts are actually fully transparent and on the record. One can find in open source information these kind of weapons deals done by companies with different governments. And in fact, the deal struck in the delivery of these weapons from an American company to Saudi Arabia was very much public. The U.S. has a policy, however, that these kind of weapons cannot be sold to countries who use them in civilian living areas. And this is why our evidence is so damning. Through our satellite imagery, we were able to demonstrate that these weapons were used in an area where there are 4 to 6 villages where civilians are living, and therefore the use of these cluster munitions is not only a violation of international standards, but is also a direct violation of the U.S. policy when it sold the weapons to Saudi Arabia.
You know, what are the chances that Saudi Arabia will, let's say, straight the line with the rest of the world and actually will say, well, you know what, yeah, we made a mistake, we used cluster bombs, we're going to stop using them anymore?
Unfortunately, we have no sense as of yet that Saudi Arabia is willing to concede and acknowledge our evidence and address our evidence. However, what I do hope at the very least will happen is that members of the coalition and indeed countries that support the coalition, like the United States, are going to put a real push on the Saudi government to immediately state on the record that going forward in this war, it will not use cluster munitions again, and indeed it will not use them in civilian living areas in any future conflict.
Yes, Belkis Villa, thank you very, very much for this conversation with us. You know, this fight in the Middle East, Barbara, is not something that is, you know, 1 + 1, it's going to turn out 2. It's always in the Middle East, never 1 + 1 turns out 2.
It's going to be much more than 2 because there's so many actors and so many scenarios at play here. And the stakes are so high. It's a literally, Lucy, it's a powder keg.
And more than that, it's like, you know, I'm trying to not say that, but the hypocrisy of the United States in one way or another, you know, not helping, but in the other way, not understanding actually with whom she is, with whom she's not, with who she's going to support, providing weapon that it doesn't need to provide, and at the end it says, well, you know what, you shouldn't have used this, like exactly the Syrian case.
With the Syrian and the barrel bombs.
Yes.
Your analyst was correct in that these sales are public. They are required by law, the Pentagon and the State Department, to notify Congress. And indeed, these cluster bombs were provided to the Saudis. Again, what was the target? She says that there were 4 or 5, 6 villages there. These specific munitions should be used against force concentrations or to bomb runways or facilities. Yes. But something else gets into this mix here.
Money.
And that is, exactly, and Israel's qualitative military edge. For many years now, it's codified into U.S. law. The U.S. is obliged to provide Israel with the wherewithal so that it will have the ability to defend itself against any combination of adversaries in the region, and that still sadly includes Saudi Arabia and the GCC states. So a lot of precision weaponry. I mean, Saudi does have JDAM and some weaponry, but they have not been released. They're cleared for the most sophisticated and surgical weaponry, and I doubt that they're even very competent in being trained to exercise this weaponry. So this is going to be a thing. I mean, they might have to get Israel's acquiescence to boost up its arsenal with more humanitarian-friendly weaponry, if that
when you
sounds...
give a state some kind of a weapon and you tell them, well, you know, use it when you need to use it, you don't know when they need to use it. And what are the, let's say, what are the reasons that are standing behind this country of using these weapons? You know, always we're talking about here providing help to fight the bad or the good, but in the Middle East you don't have any bad and good. All the bad, all the good is mixed up together, and at the end of the day, these weapons, these let's say ways of fighting will end up getting into the wrong hands. Maybe will end up at the end of the day getting into Iran, that already is a big trouble to the United States, to Saudi Arabia, to each and every one here in the region. This puts, again, the United States in the position where it doesn't understand exactly what is happening here.
Well, it reminds me one very, very frightening example from the past. In the 1980s, when the Mujahideen fought in Afghanistan against the Soviets, the United States provided the Mujahideen with Stinger missiles and other sophisticated weapons. And one decade later, it turns out that all this weaponry got to Al-Qaeda and was used against Western and U.S. targets. So it seems that it's a very short view of regarding the questions to whom the weapon is supplied.
This reminds me, you know, with Israel giving Hamas the power in the 80s to fight Fatah, and at the end of the day, Israel is having more understanding with Fatah than with Hamas today. So, you know, it's just like the same case.
It will be very interesting to see what comes out of this summit at Camp David in a couple weeks, where, as Ellie Hochenberg, your reporter, noted, they will be discussing not only arms packages, but some type of treaty type or defense agreement type security assurances to assuage the concerns of the Gulf states. And that indeed is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand it would oblige the Saudis and the coalition to almost get, it would give the U.S. veto right. Yes. That's why Israel, for many years, over the years, this has been, it's been off and on the table with U.S.-Israel relations, and Israel has always demurred. They want to keep their freedom of action, but perhaps with the GCC, some type of security arrangements could bring things into control, but then again, you have the U.S. reluctance to use force.
You know, we're looking at the Middle East, and what is happening right now in the Middle East. And just a short while ago, we did hear like a special edition on the lack of boundaries. Like from once upon a time, we looked at the map in the Middle East, and we saw countries with borders, which everything is really, we understand who is against. Right now, you're looking at the map, you don't see anything, you don't see countries, you don't see borders. And yet again, Yemen is a problematic issue. Yemen is really a strategic point for all the Arab countries. Why? Why? Because it has a lot of money, because a lot of people have interest, because a lot of countries know that this specific point can bring to maybe the entire collapse of the Middle East.
Well, one thing that the Yemenis do not have is money. Yemen is a very, very poor country. Almost its entire population, 26 million people, are living in harsh poverty. However, Yemen does control part of the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, which is the gate to the Suez Canal and to the Red Sea. And Yemen has a long coastline, and Yemen has always served as the, let's say, as the backyard of almost every Middle Eastern confrontation. It's not what is happening now in Yemen is not new. Yemen was the playground of Saudi Arabia and Egypt in the 1960s, and after that it was when there were two Yemens, South Yemen and North Yemen. It was a struggle between the superpowers, the communist South Yemen against the pro-Arab or pro-Western North Yemen. So Yemen, the Bab el-Mandeb issue is highly important. It's not there isn't let's say any resources in Yemen. They do have a small amount small quantity of oil, but it's nothing comparing to the Saudi or the Iranian or the Iraqi oil.
You know, we're always going back to the point where the United States, it seems that the United States, either we are not understanding the secret, let's say, interest that the United States has in this region, or really the United States doesn't understand exactly what is happening here. It's like found itself in some kind of a position where it's like in too many places, in too much trouble, where it says, okay, we're here, but we don't want to get into it too much. And at the end of the day, somebody will lose. And when somebody will lose, it will break, and it will break hell on earth.
The U.S. Force presence in the area, Lucy, has always been spread very widely, and their interests have not changed. Their freedom of navigation, and they want stability. They want to ensure not only right of passage up in the Strait of Hormuz, but especially in the Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The interest and the positioning, the deployment has not changed. What has changed is, first of all, you have Iran, emboldened perhaps by the international legitimacy that it has been accorded as a result of the nuclear talks. You have a new generation of Saudi leaders. You have a new king, and you have a new crown prince and a defense minister, and they maybe they're drawing lessons from the past and feel also a bit maybe not emboldened is the word like Iran, but they feel that they are losing American support. So they feel they're compelled to act. They must prevent Iran from having a toehold and having.
And they have more like common, let's say, ground with Israel or pro-Israeli thinking than pro-American thinking or pro-Western thinking.
Here, absolutely, the interests converge. As you know, I mean, the Israel Navy is patrolling this area of the Red Sea very vigilantly, and it's in Israel's vital strategic interest. They have actually seized arms smuggling ships making their way through this strait and up into eventually leading to the port of Eilat. So Israel definitely has an interest. We might see, if there's some movement politically, perhaps on the Palestinian issue, more type of overt coordination. But right now, yes, their interests are converging. I don't know exactly what is, if anything, is being done about that operationally. Yes. But Washington is the key, and what is their will?
And the key is not opening anything in the Middle East.
Actually,
right now.
Regarding the, let's say, the pro-American or the pro-Israeli approach, we must say that if we look closely to the recent appointments made by King Salman, we can see that they are very pro-American. Let's say Adel al-Jubeir, the new foreign minister, he was the, up until now in the passing 8 years, he was the Saudi ambassador to the United States. He was the one that after September 11 made the damage control vis-a-vis the American administration and the American media to minimize the damage caused to the Saudi image. And Mohammed bin Nayef is the key player here, is the new crown prince. He was educated in the United States. He is one of the leading figures in the Arab world and generally who fights against terrorism. He was the #1 operator against Al-Qaeda. He was even He was even a target of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda tried to assassinate him in 2009, and Adel al-Jubeir, the Iranian, tried to assassinate him in 2011. So both the new, let's say, leading group in Saudi Arabia are pro-American.
Basically, you're saying that this is a game between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and that Saudi Arabia is doing exactly what the United States wants because it wants to keep its interest with the United States.
It is more complicated than that. When the operation in Yemen,
there is a lot of criticism from Saudi Arabia against the United States.
Of course, it's all the Saudi media, including the social networks, and including Saudi leaders and let's say decision makers. They have, let's say, criticism against the United States, against the nuclear deal with Iran, against the United States pull out of the region. They claim that the United States is going back to the Monroe Doctrine or something like that. However, Saudi Arabia realizes that currently the United States is the only superpower that can help it. Saudi Arabia, when the operation in Yemen began, they sought Pakistani help, military Pakistani help, and the Pakistanis said no. Pakistan did not want to intervene in the Middle East. Saudi were very disappointed from the Pakistani decision, and maybe or probably there is something which relates to the recent appointments made by King Salman, because the Saudi Arabia knows that currently, and I think that for the coming years, the United States, despite all the criticism, despite all the problems, will still be the, let's say, the superpower which guarantees the Saudi safety.
What are the chances that the Arab countries, before we're finishing, will seek, will let's say, pull back from the United States? They will say, well, you know, guys, you don't understand us, you don't understand the strategy, you don't understand the policy, you don't understand the culture. We're going to Russia, we're going to look for help somewhere else.
Oh, that is really what's happening. I think the analysis, it's very thorough, but a little bit optimistic in terms of the Saudis and the Gulf states. Many of them are pushing the United States to act. They're not taking orders. They're not following. They're triggering actions. Yes, there is solidarity with the U.S. and they would expect and hope for more support, but with that doubt that the U.S. will not have their back. They have already sought to diversify. I mean, Egypt, you know, when the Congress pulled the plug temporarily on arms to Egypt, they were making nice with Russia. Putin was right in there. The UAE just signed a few days ago a $7 billion fighter deal with France. So they are trying to diversify as to not to be left in the lurch.
Gentlemen, Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going out for a small break, and then we will be back. Human Rights Watch claims that credible evidence shows the Saudi-led coalition has used U.S.-supplied cluster bombs in airstrikes in Yemen. Meanwhile, military officials there say coalition special forces have arrived in Aden. With the death toll already over 7,000 people, a Nepali minister says that number is expected to climb much higher as rescue teams struggle to reach remote villages. And protests in the Israeli-Ethiopian community continue. Hundreds demonstrate in Tel Aviv against discrimination and police brutality. Welcome back to the news today. In Nepal, search and rescue teams continue to race to reach survivors of last week's earthquake. In a statement, the country's finance minister said there are still several villages known to have been completely destroyed that have not yet been accessed. The death toll now at over 7,000 people is expected to climb far higher as the destruction is exposed. Teams today did manage to pull 3 people alive from the rubble northeast of the capital 8 days after the disaster. And with me from Nepal is Mati Goldstein, head of Zaka International Rescue Units. Good evening. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Good evening to you.
So, Mati, as the days go by, we understand that, let's say, the destruction is getting even bigger, and the disaster is getting bigger and bigger, isn't it?
I wouldn't say that disaster is getting bigger and bigger. I would say that now we have the right choppers and the right helicopters to go up to the hills and search places we couldn't do 2 or 3 days ago.
So what are you seeing right now?
Numbers are going up.
What are you seeing right now? Because from what we're understanding from the officials from Nepal are saying that a lot of villages have no access to, a lot of people probably still buried under all the destruction. So where are you focusing and in what you're focusing right now with the rescue forces?
Okay, we have a big team, 25 people. We divided into two. Some of us opened a medical hospital field in different places, in different villages. You're right, there's a lot of disaster and there's a lot of buildings that fell down. However, because the way that they build here, most of those people survived. Since Friday, we're looking for an Israeli that was missing. Unfortunately, today we found him that he was killed up in the mountains. The problem in the mountains were that all the stones and all the snow, this came down from the hill in the earthquake, and therefore now, after 8 days, we're finding a lot of people that went up to hike up there in the mountains that unfortunately are dead.
So this is basically the last Israeli that you were looking for?
Yeah, so what we know, this is the last Israeli. We found him today. Unfortunately, he got killed. Now we have our search and rescue team from the Israelites together with Zaka, United, Tel and Fierce, taking special people to rescue him and send him to burial in Israel.
So, Mati, what are the, let's say, coordination between the rescue forces, let's say, that came from Israel and the international rescue forces coming from other countries?
We work together with all the international rescue forces. However, Israelis always have this faith and very unique skills. And I think we put in a very good team here with this very complicated mission that no one thought we can get to this place we got up in the mountains. And like I said, after 8 days, we unfortunately found him dead, but at least we found him, and we're going to send him to Israel for burial.
Yes, Mati Goldstein, thank you very, very much for this conversation with us, and just God help you with all the great job that you're doing there. Thank you very much. And one elderly couple whose house was partially destroyed is now seeking refuge in Nepal's capital. Here's their story.
Their home survived the deadly earthquake, but this elderly Nepalese couple are packing their bags. They live in constant fear of aftershocks, and their son has decided to send them to safety.
With any problem, drinking water, eating, yeah, and it is some difficult. So I sent my parents to Kathmandu.
The late April quake left thousands dead throughout the country and destroyed half the houses in this region to the northeast of Kathmandu. This is the last night in a tent for the couple before facing a long bus trip to the capital.
I'm scared. But what to do? I hope I will be safe.
Their eldest son, who runs one of the only shops still open here, won't be able to join them.
So sad, yeah. I sent my father and mother to Kathmandu before me.
But his brother, who lives in Kathmandu, has come to accompany his parents.
I am very fortunate. There was a big earthquake, but I'm with my mother and father, and I have been able to bring them here.
Several hours later, all three finally get to his home, where they'll share his room. The farmers will have to get used to their new life away from the mountains. They don't know yet when they'll be able to go home again.
Yes. Internal tensions between Fatah and Hamas is threatening to break down the unity government formed last year. Efforts to preserve it continue so far without great success. The News Today diplomatic correspondent Eli Ochenberg explains.
Is this the end of the Palestinian unity government? Sources say Fatah and Hamas are seeking to reshuffle the Palestinian unity government led by Rami Hamdallah in what has been described as an attempt to cover up the failure of the reconciliation deal between the two factions. Despite their rivals signing the reconciliation agreement last year in an attempt to bury the hatchet, clashes continued as Hamas is reluctant to hand over power in Gaza to the independent Palestinian unity government.
If the problems are not solved, the movement will not be the first one or the last one. There will be other actions in order to pressure the Palestinian factions and support the unity government.
Tensions rose sharply in recent weeks after Hamas won a sweeping victory in elections at the Birzeit University, while in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority has been arresting Hamas activists. The friction peaked when the failure of a high-profile government visit to Gaza, aimed at resolving an employee dispute, ended in serious mayhem. The 8-minister delegation alleged that Hamas prevented them from leaving their hotel or meeting with anyone. But efforts to maintain the reconciliation received a boost this weekend when former U.S. President Jimmy Carter arrived in Ramallah, urging Abbas to hold long-delayed elections in the hope they will bring peace and unity.
Full implementation of the agreement reached between Hamas and Fatah and others, as a matter of fact, last April of 2014 will be very important, and we'll be continuing to work to implement everything that was agreed on that date.
Last summer's war between Hamas and Israel began with a dispute over salaries within the Palestinian factions. It remains to be seen if the current internal tensions will once again be turned against Israel.
Yes, who's playing against who and who's playing with who? And now to economy. And with me right now is economy reporter for the Jerusalem Post, Niamh Ellis. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. So we're talking today about a loss for the economy world, somebody who's really important. And we're talking about Dave Goldberg.
Dave Goldberg, 47 years old. In his own right, a renowned man in Silicon Valley. He did amazing things. He's the CEO of SurveyMonkey, which is an online surveys company. Helped bring it to be a roughly $2 billion company. You know, he had an illustrious career, started with a company called Launch Music, sold it to Yahoo. You know, in and of itself, he would definitely be someone that's makes headlines because of his passing, his very sudden passing. But one of the reasons that people are paying so much attention is that he's not just a high-tech entrepreneur, he's also the husband of Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook. And of course, Sheryl Sandberg is known as a great feminist and the writer, the author of Lean In. And she talked very much about how being married to a good husband was one of the reasons that she was able to be successful. She offers advice to young career women saying, the most important thing you will ever do in your career is pick your partner. And it's really interesting because we talk about wage inequality all the time. We see the gender gap in wages. And the kinds of things that she would say is that, you know, studies show that women, instead of even working women, educated women in ostensibly, you know, equal marriages will end up doing about twice as much housework and 3 times as much childcare as men. And she really credited Dave with doing 50-50 and putting his career and her career as a priority, along with the children and along with the housework. So it's really amazing that this is a man that won't be just remembered for tech, but also for really being a good husband.
Will it affect the Silicon Valley?
No, it's, you know, of course, SurveyMonkey is going to be in a process of finding someone else. It's not a publicly traded company yet, so it doesn't have, you know, the investors that are going to worry. But it certainly will affect Silicon Valley in that everyone there is mourning. He was very loved in the community. And of course, Facebook put up a page asking people to share their outpourings, and already there are just thousands of posts, pictures, and kind words.
At the end of the day, it's a woman who lost her husband, which is, yes.
The most important thing, yeah.
Niamh Ellis, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
For coming and explaining this. Hundreds blocked rush hour traffic in Tel Aviv today in protest against racism towards Ethiopians. What we're seeing right now are live images coming from the Rabin Square in Tel Aviv. The protests have this evening devolved into clashes with police in the center of the city. It comes after an Ethiopian soldier was filmed being beaten by police in an apparent unprovoked attack last week. Or Shapira was at the protest to get a first-hand view.
More than 30 years after they first arrived in Israel, Ethiopian Jews still feel neglected and discriminated against. But in the last few days, their protest has shifted to another level as they held series of demonstrations against what they claim is racism and police brutality toward them.
We want to express our anger at what is going on for 30 years. We don't want racism, we want equality.
Hundreds of people attended this rally outside one of the most recognized malls in the city, perhaps a symbol for the growing gap between those walking in the upper floors and this community that cries for recognition and equal rights. Parliament members came to support them.
This is the Israeli society's fight, and we need to be here to make sure that there is no discrimination in the Israeli society. It doesn't only have to do with any kind of police violence. If there was such, it needs to be taken care of.
Although Ethiopian Jews, also known as falashas, began coming to Israel in the 1960s, in 1985 and 1991, Israel carried out 2 military operations to bring them from the war-torn African country. Today, the community in Israel numbers 120,000. But over the years, it seems they have been neglected, and their anger and frustration are rising. The peak was reached last Thursday when 14 protesters were injured by police in Jerusalem protest. This massive protest took place after a video showing 2 police officers beating a Jewish Ethiopian soldier. The police say they respect all minorities.
We have a special sensitivity to his community. They didn't get permission for this protest. However, we still allow them to protest and to block the roads.
However, not everybody is convinced.
I look at the news from Baltimore and I think, this cannot happen in my country. A day goes by and I realize that this is happening in my country.
Perhaps it's too easy to compare this protest to a possible inspiration for it, the wave of demonstrations in Baltimore, US, over the killing of a young African American in police custody. True, no one here has been killed yet, but when it comes to treatment of minorities, the anger is similar.
And from Israel to the same images that we just saw from protests against alleged police brutality to Baltimore, where the issue is still at the forefront, but now with a different tone. And Baltimore's mayor has now lifted a nightly curfew implemented after days of rioting over the death of Freddie Gray. Here's more from ABC.
A new round of arrests in Baltimore. Protesters defying a 5th night of citywide curfew, pepper sprayed by police. But largely Saturday, Baltimore taking on a striking new tone.
People are really coming together in amazing ways.
Hundreds of peaceful protesters marched towards the Civic Plaza in front of City Hall.
We will fight for Freddie Gray.
Many of them advocating peace.
It was like celebratory because I guess they finally seen some justice.
In a briefing overnight, the police commissioner saying it's in the hands of the state's attorney.
We'll have the confidence that the truth will come out and the truth will overcome.
These are the officers charged in the death of Freddie Gray. The driver of this police van, 45-year-old Caesar Goodson Jr., faces the most serious charge of murder with a potential 30-year sentence. He's been a Baltimore cop for 16 years. Officers Garrett Miller and Edward Nero, both in their 20s, and Lieutenant Brian Rice, a 17-year veteran, all seen here carrying Gray to that van. Each faced several charges as well. Officer William Porter and Sergeant Alicia White, who was just promoted, faced charges of involuntary manslaughter, among others, and are both accused of not giving Gray medical attention. The police commissioner saying he is letting the process take its course, but warning,
we have no tolerance for any misconduct that takes place in this organization.
Baltimore authorities saying they want to make absolutely sure that the city is safe and secure before they lift the curfew. And until then, the National Guard will remain in place. Jim Avila, ABC News, Baltimore.
Somebody said that maybe Israel is another state in the United States. Now to sports. And with me is the host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. You were on a vacation.
Yes, I was, but I'm not anymore.
You're not anymore. No. And you're here, and you weren't at the big fight of the 21st century.
No, I wish I were. Usually we bring 3 different subjects. We just dedicate a little time to each. But when the fight of the century occurs, I think we have to give it respect and play along.
3.5 minutes only about this.
Yes, and about boxing. We speak about football, basketball daily. Let's give boxing the honor it deserves. The fight of the century. Floyd Mayweather against Manny Pacquiao. Probably the best 2 boxers of our generation. After long negotiations, they faced each other last night in Las Vegas. So much money was in this. Mayweather.
I saw the picture that he uploaded on Twitter. It was
yes.
Facebook, whatever.
There's a reason why Floyd Mayweather calls himself money. Before the fight, before he won the fight, he already had $120 million in his pocket. Now that he has won, people are speaking of around $180 million. Only $180 million.
$180 million.
Yes.
$180 million times 4. It's like too much for me.
Maybe you can buy a house. Maybe you can buy a house in Tel Aviv with this. Maybe.
Maybe you can buy a house in Tel Aviv. Several houses in Tel Aviv.
Yes, maybe even
some houses in Tel Aviv.
So Floyd Mayweather, you're welcome to buy a house or 2 here in Tel Aviv. A lot of money here, and obviously a lot of interest. Manny Pacquiao is taking home only $80 million.
Only?
Yes.
Aww.
Big money, obviously, here. Huge standings all over the world. People are watching this. Let's speak about the winner, Floyd Mayweather. A lot of people don't like him because he's what the Americans... Yes, he's out there, exactly. A lot of people had negative comments about him. But hey, he won. Yes, he won. It was not a knockout. It was by the judge's decision, but it was a unanimous decision. And he knows many people had problems with him. And this is what he had to say following the fight.
Let's see.
If I'm not mistaken, everyone was saying for years I was scared and Floyd will lose. And I mean, all you guys said this. All the people that said this. Now tomorrow when you write your story, I want you guys all you guys that said I was scared. And all the guys that wrote negative articles about me, you know, for the last few years, you know, I try to keep myself away from negative publicity, you know, when people write negative about me. Because people don't really know me. Tomorrow, for all those that wrote bad stories about me, I'm going to wake up early in the morning, and I want to see y'all stories tomorrow.
The Americans would say, in your face. That's what Floyd Mayweather feels now.
180 million reasons in your face.
And you know what? He's right. He won the fight of the century. He deserves it. People may not like him being out there. He has it.
This money, like, in nothing.
That's why people don't really like him, but he won. He deserves it.
He deserves it.
Yes.
He deserves it. Jonathan Regev, thank you very much. That's it. We're not going to talk about anymore. People were earning $180 million for nothing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Less than a week to the British general elections, the much-anticipated royal baby was born as politicians, let's say, contemplate whether it will affect their chances. Royal family fans burst with excitement. Shahal Peled has more on new baby.
We welcome with humble duty the second born of their Royal Highnesses.
Pink reigned over British landmarks, celebrating the birth of the new princess. Thrilled Britons and tourists could hardly hold their excitement.
I'm over the moon for them, and I think Prince Charles said he would love a little granddaughter. It's a girl!
I feel like crying, to be honest with you. I feel overwhelmed as well because I love the royal family and what they do for our country.
But enthusiastic fans weren't the only ones delighted by the news. Indeed, cynical and satire headlines emerged with the report that a woman gave birth to her second baby, but the rest of the world, from Germany to China, sent their congratulations to the fourth in line to the royal throne.
The fourth person in line to the throne has arrived, and it is a girl.
British political party leaders also took time out from the election trail to congratulate the royal couple's newest member.
I know as a father who went through anxious moments of the birth of my two kids, it is an anxious time, but now it will be a joyous time for them both, and all of the good wishes of the country go to them.
It might be a less joyous time for Ed Miliband, who heads the Labour Party and hopes to win Britain's general election on May 7th. The theoretical royal baby bounce, by which the feel-good factor sweeping the nation would help the Prime Minister in power, leaves David Cameron's Conservative Party with hopes of a last-minute boost. However, according to the YouGov UK polling report, the new royal baby will have no measurable impact on Thursday's knife-edge election, leaving the vote the closest one in decades.
Yes, and with me right now from London is contributor Jonathan Sashadoti. Good evening, good to see you.
Good evening, Lucy.
I love to see this small smile, because this little smile that you have, it means what? Like, okay, you had a baby, congratulations, it's a girl, all good. Now let's go to the important things, because there are important things in life than the girl that Kate just had.
Well, on the contrary, with 3 days, 12 hours, 7 minutes left until our polls open here in the United Kingdom for the general election, it's been quite a welcome break, having something else on the news and something else to talk about. But sure enough, we're back to more serious things now. And the baby, will it deliver some sort of bump for the Conservative Party in the polls? As you saw there in the report, there's no indication from the pollsters that it will, but the bookies, who measure where people actually put their money, suggest that there might be a little increase. But that presumed increase of votes for the incumbent party may not, in fact, materialise. What we're actually seeing as the election draws ever closer and the campaigning time left is growing shorter, is that people do not trust any of the politicians. In a question time event on TV just a few days ago, we could see that the members of the public who were asking the questions in that programme were actually all rather mistrusting of all three party leaders, asking how on earth they can trust them to keep their promises.
Jonathan, in the name of God, explain to me how on earth this can actually, the birth of this baby, beautiful baby girl, can actually affect the election.
Well, maybe a general increase in good mood among Britons might perhaps make people feel a bit better about the country they're living in, which might in turn make them feel a bit better about the government that's been ruling it for some time. But more seriously speaking, the issue of this trust and the levels of trust has gone to some sort of ridiculous level now. We've got David Cameron, the leader of the Tory party, who's now promised that he'd put in place a law forbidding himself from raising taxes if he wins, showing in a way, people have said, that he doesn't trust himself not to break his own promise not to raise taxes. Similarly, we've got Ed Miliband, on the other hand, who today actually unveiled a 2.6 metre high concrete limestone monument with his policies carved into it in stone, literally. He's hoping that it won't be a gravestone as it looks, but in fact be a sort of promise that he can install in the Downing Street garden.
Ah, Jonathan, it's even more interesting than the Israeli elections, with baby and fairy tale stories and everything. Thank you very, very much for this. Always good to see you. Yes, and now to culture. And on that note, Shachar Perez is all smiling here. Already knows the name of the baby. You have a smile like you already know the name of the baby.
I will not reveal it. I will let Kate and Will make their own declaration.
But you gave them your proposition.
Yes, of course. And, well, Lucy, thank God it's May, not only because of the royal baby, because it's been a pretty dry spring, and now it's the real time, summertime and blockbuster time. Absolutely. Well, it started this weekend with the Avengers: The Age of Ultron almost reaching $200 million only in its opening weekend. Wow. Only second to the highest box office opening weekend. Yes, this is in one weekend, and it's still not over in the United States. And it's only second to the record, which went to the first Avengers back in May 2012. So the Avengers franchise is making Marvel and Disney very happy. And this marks, of course, the opening of the hot summer season of 2015, which is going to be filled with comics and superheroes. A lot to wait for, especially for these fans. The Avengers is quite good, a lot of visual effects. It's nice, especially for those who love it. Let's have a look at what the summer brings us. So we start with, as promised, superheroes with Ant-Man. This is, once again, Marvel, and it's with the unusual casting of actor and comedian Paul Rudd. It's very nice.
Him.
Yes, and now he's with the six-packs and everything. It's very nice to see him, in addition to Michael Douglas as his mentor. This will definitely, well, at least Marvel and Disney, the distributor, hope that this will bring the success that the Avengers 2 brought, and ahead of the Avengers 3 eventually. Next are Fantastic Four, more superheroes. These are Marvel's longest-running, most dysfunctional group of superheroes, one might say. This time starring Miles Teller, and you might remember him from Whiplash. He's the drummer from Whiplash, but he's also now Mr. Fantastic, and him and his teammates will have to team up together to defeat Dr. Doom.
Dr. Doom?
Yes.
Okay.
But not only superheroes are ahead of us, also very exciting science fiction revivals. We have Jurassic World, Spielberg's 90s is now revived with new dinosaurs, and as promised, Arnold Schwarzenegger is back, The Terminator, Genesis this time.
He's not giving up.
He's not giving up. After 4 years of being a governor, now he's back. He was, as he promised, very exciting news.
Okay, you're going to take me to one of them.
Of course.
Of course.
Guaranteed.
Jaffa Port, we are superhero woman.
Yes, a hot summer it is.
Yes, hot summer. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
2 minutes, and we will be back.